Evolve or perish. Chapter 8. The defense of plowing in. The practice by corporations of retaining for their own use for capital purposes of portions of their gross income that should be turned back into the economic system in the form of more and higher wages is so obviously uneconomic and antisocial when the community is viewed as a unit, as a living, functioning organism, that it would seem difficult to defend it on any ground. Nevertheless, efforts are made to defend the practice, and the efforts are successful. The evidence that they are successful is found in the permitted continuation of the practice. This would seem to imply that there is an either lack of logic in the methods of those who are responsible for safeguarding community welfare, that the guardians of the community welfare are not free agents, or that there is a lack of understanding of what the real situation is. A reading of a typical defense of the plowing back operations of the corporations will be enlightening. Here is a defense published in the Bulletin of the National City Bank of New York, issue of September 1934. There is nothing either new or reprehensible in the practice of investing profits for the enlargement of productive capacity. It has been going on from the beginning of the so-called capitalistic system, and with highly beneficial results to society. All industrial progress has come about in this manner. The great textile industry of this country has been built up in this way. Likewise, the iron and steel industry, and the automobile industry in a much shorter time. Such investment is one of the methods by which economic law accomplished a broad distribution of the benefits of increasing wealth. The profits converted into industrial plants, with the employment thus provided, becomes the means of increasing the supplies of consumptive goods, the form of wealth that ministers directly to the comfort and welfare of the people. This statement is typical of the logic that the capitalists and financiers have used to excuse their unethical conduct and to confuse their victims. Let us analyze it. It states, "There is nothing new or reprehensible in the practice of investing profits for the enlargement of productive capacity." First, as to the newness. There is nothing new about it. The practice has been with us since the dawn of the industrial era. It is but one of several related items which have been with us since that time, all of which are entirely unmoral and unethical. It is as reprehensible as any other form of stealing. Thievery has been with us a long time. 2 thieves were crucified with Christ. That happened a long time ago. There is nothing new about stealing, but its ancient lineage does not alter its antisocial nature. As to the use of profits for the enlargement of productive capacity, it was shown in a previous chapter that there is a difference of about $5 billion a year between the declared net income of corporations and the amount reported received as dividends by stockholders. It can be assumed that this amount was reinvested in enlargement of productive capacity. If this is all done with the consent of the stockholders, it is quite all right. But shares of stock should be issued to the stockholders for such profits withheld from them as dividends. Such funds are new capital and should be clearly identified as such. But these legitimate profits are not the only monies which have been used for the enlargement of productive capacity. In the previous chapter, it was shown that during the 1920 through 1929 decade, $150 billion of gross income, not profit, was retained out of gross income by corporations. This money is equal to the increase of gross income which should have been added to wages as labor's share of increased income due to increased productivity and prosperity in general. Labor was the one item which showed no increase in income that was in keeping with the increase in gross income. The money was withheld from the workers. It belonged to them under all ethical principles. It was retained by the stockholders and became part of the capital structure, just as a share of the legitimate profits were similarly used. This is an illegitimate use of the portion of gross income which should have been devoted to paying higher wages to those employed, and to financing the hiring of larger number of workers by the reduction of the working week, in keeping with the degree of increased productivity, achieved through the use of labor-saving machines. If so used, the money would have increased the purchasing power of the domestic market, and would have ensured the continuance of what we believed was prosperity. Instead, the money was retained by the corporations, plowed back into their capital structures, with disastrous results. The practice is reprehensible because it amounts to economic murder of the community. The frankness with which this statement admits that all of our major industries have been built up in this unethical manner is the most praiseworthy feature in it. The statement, "Such investment is one of the methods by which the economic law accomplishes a broad distribution of the benefits of increasing wealth," is just plain silly bunk. It is done just the opposite. The violations of economic law have concentrated wealth and the powers of wealth production in the hands of an extremely small percentage of the population. This situation is so obvious and so well supported by incontrovertible data that it is hard to understand how the National City Bank could permit such a statement to be issued. If we assume that the banking fraternity actually believes such statements as this when it makes them, what must we think about the caliber of their intelligence and the manner of functioning of their thinking equipment, to say nothing about their ability to handle the responsibilities placed upon banks and bankers as community institutions? And as to the final sentence, the profits converted into industrial plants, with the employment thus provided, becomes the means of increasing the supplies of consumptive goods, the form of wealth that ministers directly to the comfort and welfare of the people. This practice has without doubt brought about the increase of productive capacity and an increase in the supply of goods. It increased the productive capacity at the expense of the workers by taking the necessary money out of the workers' pay envelopes and transferring it to the stockholders. This was done to the extent of at least $150 billion during the decade 1920 through 1929. This was a piece of gigantic economic piracy. If this money were given to the workers in the form of increased earnings, they would have been easily able to supply capital needed for any desired industrial expansion by purchasing stock issues. The existing stockholders are not possessed of any divine right to a monopoly of ownership of industrial producing facilities. The workers have just as much right to receive their just share of wealth as do the stockholders. The law gives stockholders or boards of directors no right to rob workers of their just share of income by manipulation of economic process or by any other mechanisms. As to the statement, "with the employment thus provided," the statement is entirely untrue. The money was taken from the workers to produce the labor-saving industrial plants in which the amount of labor employed per unit of production is greatly reduced. The situation is very simple and tragic. The workers, while working, had a share of their earnings withheld from them by capital, and these earnings were used to install machinery which threw the workers out of jobs. The statement was issued at a time when 12 million workers were without jobs and in the midst of a depression brought about by the plowing in that was done during the preceding prosperity. The plowing in system has eliminated employment instead of providing it. The bank's statement is correct in holding that the industrial plants which were built by depriving the workers of their fair wages became the means of increasing the supplies of consumptive goods, the form of wealth that ministers directly to the comfort and welfare of the people. But the money that should have gone to the workers to produce purchasing power to enable them to buy the goods produced was withheld from them and used to pay for the producing plants. The workers, therefore, were deprived of the consumptive goods that ministered directly to the comfort and welfare of the people. They did not have the money necessary to buy comfort and welfare. The plowing in system defeated its own purposes. Getting capital for industrial plant expansion by robbing the workers was not an economic necessity. The banks were overburdened with excess deposits not owned by workers, and were crying aloud for opportunities to make loans. These excess deposits were the capitalists' money, which should have been used by them as capital investments to finance the industrial plant expansion by purchase of new stock issues. If this had been done, the workers would have had more ample funds as purchasing power to absorb the output of the expanded industrial plants. In another chapter, it is shown that bank loans relative to deposits decreased at an alarming rate. This was merely one of the effects produced by the plowing in process, by which corporations financed all their needs for expansion by robbing the workers instead of using credit facilities available in the banks. This is a form of unemployment. the unemployment of money, from which the banks suffer because of the economic piracy of the plowing in process by corporations. Statements in defense of plowing in, such as the foregoing issued by the National City Bank, show that our bankers have never had the real truth revealed to them. They have undoubtedly presented the best story they could on the basis of the facts made available to them by statisticians and economists whose vision is not adequate to encompass fundamental truth, or who are unable to see the economic system as a whole. Nevertheless, their narrow viewpoints and the actions based on them are responsible to a large extent for the crash of our economic system. The individual and collective acts of our bankers and members of the board of directors of our corporations are specifically responsible for our economic problems. Something must be done to arouse them sufficiently to appreciate the fact that a drastic change must take place in our economic and social system, and that they have responsibilities which they must shoulder in bringing about these changes for their own best interests as well as the best interests of the entire population of the country. They must learn to stop following their false prophets and blind advisors and open their eyes to the basic truths. In the light of these basic truths, they must rebuild our tottering system on sounder and safer lines. They must make vast changes in their viewpoints, and it is advisable for them to do so without any quibbling or haggling. They must bow to the inevitable, and they might just as well quit struggling. It only makes matters worse.